Hello, I'm Dave Frykman. In this video, I'm going to show you how I carve this fellow, and we'll go through the painting steps as well. So let's get started. I'm carving a piece of eastern white cedar here. I've prepared it. I've actually drawn a little bit of ideas of where I want things on the surface. I don't follow the lines exactly. I just kind of use them as a reference. The tool I'm using here is a 4.5 inch grinder, a very common tool, and I use a 50 grit sandpaper. Now I've switched to a different tool. This tool is a die grinder sort of tool with a 1/4 inch shaft and a structured carbide bit. Works very well with cedar. Cedar is a wood that's rather brittle. It's a light wood, and it's difficult to carve, I think, with knives and gouges if that's someone's preference. But with these tools it works very well. It comes off as a fine dust. I am working inside my dust collector box here, so I'm outside and my hands and the work are inside behind glass, and all the dust is drawn away by a big dust collector. I like to start with the face, just get the rough outlines of where things are. I guess I've made so many faces in the past that it becomes sort of second nature to me now, where I want to make the cuts, what cuts to make. This little fellow is going to be a fisherman, so he's going to have a full face with just a beard on the lower part of his face. So I want to give him lips and a mouth that are visible. It's a little trickier than just giving a Santa Claus a full beard, but once you do it a few times you get the hang of it. I always find carving men to be much easier than carving than carving children or women. I can be a lot more aggressive in my cuts and careless with where things are. Whereas if you're going to do a child, for instance, any non-conformity looks a little strange. Now I've sped up the carving in a few places here just to conserve time, especially with this tool. I'm just roughing out the hat and move down to the sleeves next, I think. I take a log of cedar and I split it to get 4 pieces. And then the face is carved into the very heart of the tree. That wood seems to be better for that sort of thing. I'm lucky on this piece that I don't have any knots to contend with, but with these tools I can work through knots without too much difficulty. One of the reasons I like cedar is because of the crispness with which I can carve it with these tools. As you see, it leaves very few fuzzies. If I'm carving butternut especially, but also pine, it tends to leave more fuzzies, and then I have to deal with those when I'm trying to finish the piece. Very little of that with cedar. I tend to not leave my pieces unpainted, so I don't often take advantage of the color of cedar, but cedar is a beautiful wood. If somebody, and occasionally I do, somebody wanted to leave a piece unfinished and just put a layer of, say, shellac on it to bring out the color. A lot of carvers prefer to carve basswood for its buttery texture. I'm sure it works very well with knives and gouges. I really don't advise it with these tools. I found that it leaves so many fuzzies it's almost impossible to clean it up later. guess I'm fortunate to live in an area where cedar is readily available to anyone who wants to use it. Well, I've switched back to my die grinding tool. I'm going to clean up the face, get things looking a little better, and then I'm going to switch to a smaller version of the same tool. The bit I'm using is a structured carbide bit. These are commonly sold for wood carvers in all sorts of shapes. This is a medium grit, but I like the barrel shape. I almost never use anything except the barrel shape, and when you think about it, it gives you that nice crisp 90-degree cut. If you use a ball shape, sometimes you can make use of them, but I really don't find much use of for the cone shaped bits anything other than the barrel shaped. They last a very long time with this wood. They're not cheap though. Okay, now I'm going to switch to my clean up a few things and then switch to my smaller die grinding tool. It's nice to have a different bit in each tool and not have to change bits. I just hate doing that, so I keep my bits as much as I can permanently in the tool that I'm using them in. You see, I'm just cleaning up the nose. My tendency is to make the noses way too big. I'm trying to remember to make it a little smaller. Make my wife happy. This isn't the final cut I'll be making. I'll do that with a different bit. But I'd like to get as close to finished as I can with this tool. Trying to give him a little bit of a smile. I really believe most of the smile occurs in the eyes, not in the mouth. But it doesn't hurt to get some of the smile in the mouth too. As you can see, I'm giving him one of those fisherman beards, letting the lower lip show through and the upper lip. Just a few more definition cuts here. As you see, I've left the eyes on this piece to be done with the finer tool, the sharper tool. You notice I also tend to, if I make a cut on one side of the face, I immediately make the same cut on the other. No, I guess I am roughing in the eyes here. I didn't think I did, but sometimes I do. I tend to carve eyes by carving the upper lid, but not the lower lid. I let the lower lid be defined by the paint. I find that if I carve the entire eye, it just doesn't work for me. Very little actual carving is done with the final tool. It's mostly just sharpening up edges, cleaning things up, putting in lines. I do the hands here. I generally give my carvings 4 fingers and a thumb on the hands and 4 toes all together. Of course, you can't see that because he's got boots on. But That's an old habit from cartooning days. Cartoonists frequently will do that. Just seems like 5 toes is too many. A lot of carvers tend to use the flexible shaft tools. I've never felt comfortable with them. The shaft is always pulling, it seems to me, on the wrong way on the bit. Maybe I'm just fortunate to have big hands that can easily handle these all-in-one tools. But I just prefer these. Some people ask where my face came from, how I developed the particular face that I tend to carve. And the answer, I think, is possibly evident if you watch the opening clip. They look like me because I tend to use a mirror a lot in studying what the face does when you smile or when you frown, where the lines are. It's a good trick for anybody doing any sculpting or carving is to have a mirror handy, so you can, if you think of a certain expression, you just glance at the mirror, make that expression, and just study where the lines change. This piece is sort of what I call a pillow carving, in that I start with sort of a soft pillow shape and then do a relief carving in the round, just wrapping the arms rather close to the body. It's a technique that I tend to like. Frequently I will also add arms onto a piece. I'll do one of those for a later video. Another thing I like to do is to pin the arms to the piece so that they move. Sometime I'll demonstrate how that's done. Now I've switched to the carbide bit. It's not a structured carbide, it's a barrel-shaped carbide bit in another die grinder 1/8" shaft tool. And I'm just sharpening up all the edges here. And I'll put in the hair. Say now I'm putting in the hair and the eyebrows. Sharpening up the line in the eyes. Now I'm going to put in, pretty soon I'll put in the smile lines. Here they are, the smile lines. I like to put a couple of smile lines on the outside corner of the eye. I had a friend who would smile and his eyes would close, and I used to enjoy watching him laugh because his eyes would develop these wonderful smile lines. And I'm just moving around, sharpening up the edges that I've already carved in with the other bit. Now I'll also put in the hair, in the beard, and then I'll sharpen up the lines in the rest of the piece, and we'll be done. As I'm finishing them up here, I'll mention that when I'm done carving, I found a long time ago that if I coat a piece, especially a piece carved in cedar, if I coat it with shellac and then let it dry for a day, it's much easier to sand the surface and get a nice softened edge to it that I prefer, and get rid of any little fuzzies that are left over. The shellac, not many people use it anymore, but boy, I sure like it. Then I will use a flap sander. I don't think I saved any video of flap sanding this piece, but it just takes a few seconds on the flap sander to clean them up and get them ready for paint. Now you see I've put in the lines for the hair to suggest the hair. trick of carving is to suggest things, not necessarily duplicate them, at least for my style of carving. Once he's ready for paint, if I'm using cedar, it's very important that I give him a good coat of poly. Usually use a water-based poly to seal the wood, because cedar has so much tannin in it. If you paint it a light color like white or yellow, after a year or so that tannin will work its way through the shellac into the paint, discolor the paint, unless you have a nice solid barrier of a plastic poly on the piece. I think this part is sped up, just showing you the sharpening of the lines here. Adding a few details in the hat to suggest that it's a fisherman's slicker hat. Again, very easy to do with this tool in cedar. Before I was a carver, I was a potter working in clay, and I would make mugs, and I would make faces and put them on the mugs. And I think doing things like that really gave me a head start when it came to carving faces. And I wish people would, if you want to carve, would get some clay and just get some round dowels and sticks and things, and just pretend like it's wood and carve things out of the clay and push things around and develop their style. In that way it's a lot easier than making your mistakes in wood. Okay, we're about ready for the shellac here. Just about done with the carving. A few more details here and there. One or two little touches. Give them some dimples here. I'm just looking him over to see if there's anything that I perhaps missed. Well, I think he's done. Ready for shellac. Just to show you a few seconds of applying shellac to the piece. Then I'm going to let him dry for a day. Hit him with the flap sander to smooth out the surface a little and take off any fuzzies that are left. And then I will put a coat of white paint on, let that dry. See, I've done that here, and now I'm just putting the flesh color on, the parts that are going to be flesh. Always use a white paint under the flesh color. That way the white, I don't have to use so many coats of the flesh color. And now his yellow slicker. On the tip, I'd like to add a touch of red to the yellow for this particular application. It seems to give it a little more intensity. Now I've painted the beard brown, and I'm giving it a touch of a light brown just to give it some contrast and some depth. I always like to put a light color over a dark color, never the other way around. And now the eyes. I'm putting on a white first, and I'm not real careful about where it goes because all the edges are going to be covered. The blue, the only part that's really important is where the blue touches the white. For the black, the only important place is where the black touches the blue. And now I'm darkening the upper lid. I found that if I don't do that, the eye tends to look rather vacant. And now I'm going to define the lower lid with coming back with the flesh color. And I like to make my eyes rather narrow. Helps define the smile. I think you can see the change when I make it narrower. I skipped the step where I added a little dot with toothpick of white to give it a shine in the eye. And now I'm just putting on the blush. Notice that the paint was well dried, and I wet the surface before I start the blush. That lets it blend in much more easily. The blush is just kind of a reddish-orange color. Really brings the face to life. Put it on the hands too. Now I'm putting a layer of sanding sealer as a poly coat. This allows me to do the stain step, which is coming up right here. Without that, the stain would just lift the paint right off. Now I'm putting just a regular brown paint on, which is what I use for stain, a watered down brown paint. I put it on the whole thing, and then I wipe it off. First with a brown, with a dry towel, and when I'm done with that, I'll use a wet towel and clean it up, brighten up the places I want it bright, leave the stain in the cracks and crevices, and one final coat of poly to protect the paint. These paints that I use tend to attract dust if I don't do that. Well, here he is, my little wharf fisherman. Thanks for watching. This is Dave Frykman signing off.